valley. With Mont Blanc, obviously front and center there. This particular image has got quite a few of the ski routes, mainly as it's pointing at the Chamonix Aiguille, some of the steeper, more extreme ski routes. But you can also see the sort of classic ski touring routes on Mont Blanc itself. FATMAP, you can use it in 2D, you can use it in 3D, you can spin it around. For example, here we have a spun round to the other side of the Chamonix Aiguille, and we can see the Vallée Blanche, and you can see the detail that you can actually pull out on the map. You can see the ice fall, classic ski descent comes down the side here. And the current version of FATMAP has massively increased its resolution, especially across a lot of the alpine areas, so you can really get involved in the detail. You can overlay the classic routes. Subscribers can input their own routes, and you can scroll over these routes and get lots of more information. And again, you can see, if you kind of follow my cursor, the sort of classic descent of the Vallée Blanche here, or Gros Rognon variant, or down the Petit Envers, Grand Envers, lots of different things. You can get lots of information. And as a planning tool, I find it fantastic because I can really get an idea of what I'm going to find when I go in the mountains. So I just picked a route that I particularly like here. Kind of get into a bit more detail. So the Petit Rocher here, one of the sort of classic descents from the mid-station and the Plan de Guy, Guy de Midi up here. And it's a kind of great place to ski when the weather's a bit bad up high, but it's cold enough to have some low snow. So we can get in there, we can actually, you can see the detail that we can grab out of that, pretty tight. And then you can actually kind of see, this is the sort of somebody's that recorded this, but you can, plan your own routes, plan your own variations. We can spin it around sideways a bit, get another view, a bit more a sideways view as to what that may look like. And then actually one of the features I particularly like is you can overlay this with the actual topographic map of the area. In France here we've got IGN, but you've also got the OS maps in the UK, Swiss Topo, IGN in Spain, Austria, US, or actually the open topo map's actually pretty useful for countries that you don't have the actual local mapping. And for me, where I was brought up as a kind of geographer and using real maps, real paper maps, I find this a really useful tool to help me relate what's on the map to what's on the ground. You can also overlay different overlays, avalanche being the terrain, steepness of terrain angle. So you can see up here, 25 to 30, 30, 35, etc., etc. So you can get an idea of what you may actually come across. And as I'm sure most of you know, if any terrain's above 30 degrees in angle, then you're in avalanche terrain, and there's the potential for snow to move around and slide on us if the conditions were appropriate. But also, I find when I'm in my tour planning, being able to overlay the aspect where I can see the angle, that way I can sort of choose whether I'm going to be northerly, southerly, southwest, southeast, and get an idea of what time of day I might want to be there in terms of getting the best snow conditions, elevation, etc., etc., etc. So lots of great options there to help with your planning. And then this is actually the descent we made on that particular day based on information. We were pretty happy to go and ski the Petit Rocher, and as you can see on this particular day, we got pretty nice snow, pretty good north-facing snow. That's under the Aiguille de Pays and the Chamonix, and the Plan at the background. And then looking across to the Brevon, Flagère side of Chamonix, for those of you who know the area. So a really useful and a really, I think personally, a really powerful tool when it comes to planning your days in the mountains. And we've talked a bit about the Alps here, and I'm going to talk more as we go through this evening about how I would use it in more remote areas. So talk about skiing in the Arctic. So where is the Arctic? So the Arctic Circle is 66.3 north. You can see it on the map here. I'll excuse all the maps this evening. I love maps. So it comes right around. You see it encompasses most of Greenland, not all of it. It just touches Iceland and no more. Sort of northern half of Norway, Sweden, Russia, big chunk of Russia, Alaska, Canada, etc. So I'm going to focus on the sort of European element of the Arctic, and I've sort of divided it out a bit into sort of non-glacial and glacial. So I'm going to do a bit of talk a bit about Norway. I'm just going to sneak Iceland in and no more. I mean, technically, I think we're on the limit when it comes to Iceland. Some time in Greenland and some time up in Svalbard as well, which I mean, I personally think are probably the most normally skiable mountains around. Once you get up into northern Ellesmere and these other places, there's actually not a lot of interesting skiing. It's pretty flat. So we're going to start off talking about Norway, and we're going to start right up in the north, actually up in Finmark and Troms. Now the Lyngen area of Norway, which is in Troms here, around here, just east of Tromsø, is a really famous, it's probably the most famous place for ski touring, I think, in the Arctic, and certainly in Norway. And you know, I first visited there 20 plus years ago, and we hardly saw anybody in those times, but it's become incredibly popular. It's become so popular, I'm not going to talk about it at all this evening. I'm just going to show you a couple of nice shots from the island of Kefaloya, which is just west of Tromsø, and everything else I'm going to leave to other areas, mainly because I personally enjoy skiing in places that are a bit more remote, a bit quieter. So we'll start up in Finmark, western Finmark. Finmark's a pretty massive county. It goes right across the Kirkenes on the Russian border. But the area that's interesting as a skier, as a ski tourer, is this western part. And I would have said sort of Alta and west. And I've spent, COVID aside, the last 7 or 8 years, part of every spring skiing in this part of Norway. I think it's absolutely amazing. And still relatively quiet, not that many skiers. Fly into Alta, it's pretty easy to get to via Oslo. And then you can ski, not just next to Alta, but over towards Oxfjord and across that way. And a lot of the early trips that I've done in that part of the world have been boat-based. And you can see from the map here, I'm just going to point down to Oxfjord. Here, a little village. This is Oxfjord, and the village is called Oxfjord as well, where I've operated a lot using a boat that kind of bases itself there for most of the winter. And you can see the ski touring terrain. We've got an ice cap on Oxfjord Jokul. We've got all these fantastic fjords. This is the island of Sternøya, where we've got some amazing fjords that we can operate from, anchor the boat and go skiing from. Saline, which is a beautiful national park up here, and again some superb skiing. And you can see from the map as well, we've got lots of different aspects and lots of places to hide from bad weather, which I think is particularly important if you're operating at these high latitudes. So this is the boat I often work up with there in that part of the world. It's the Goxheim. It's owned by a Norwegian guy who's from Finmark itself. And Charles is classically stoic, slightly grumpy, until you get through that kind of veneer of Norwegian reservedness. And he has a massive passion for skiing and sharing his part of Norway. So any of you who have not been boat skiing before, we live on the boat, we get dropped off on the beach, we go skiing, and then we get ski back down to the boat. And then this is just opposite Oxfjord, a peak called Lopetinden, and one of the kind of, usually one of the starting tours we do on any of those trips to that part of the world. And as you can see, it's super nice skiing right down to the beach with the boat below us. And one of the super nice things I like about being on a boat is the sort of camaraderie of being on a boat. You get back on the deck, you sit, have a cup of tea, have a beer. We've just come down from skiing here, a few beers. The beers all live in a barrel on the deck, and then we move the boat, off we go, head off to somewhere a little bit different, and then anchor up for the night, have a nice meal, and Charles, the skipper, does all the cooking, and then we plan the next day. And planning skiing in that part of the world is fantastic, especially in Finmark. There's no guidebooks to that part of the world. It's all about looking at the map, looking at terrain, and seeing what you fancy doing. And I use FATMAP a lot in this part of the world. It's sort of one of the ironies that there's actually better mobile internet connection at 71 degrees north than there is at my house in the Chamonix Valley. So we can plot our route for the following day. It's up onto Loppetinden, which is actually the highest peak in Finmark, highest peak in the region, and just comes onto the edge of the Oxford-Yokel ice cap. And then we can just overlay that with our, the Avalanche overlay that I mentioned earlier, and we can see on this particular tour, the only area of steepness that I'm probably concerned about at all is this section in here to get up onto the edge of the ice cap. And we can use the aspect feature. We can see that it's all relatively northerly, so it actually keeps the snow quite well. I'll usually operate up there in the springtime, so northerly aspects can quite often still have cold snow, or if it's got really warm northerly aspects, means that the spring snow hasn't gone too slushy, too soft. So it adds into my tour planning. And then when we're heading out, this is us just skinning up through that section there. The steep bit was just below the guys there. And this is looking out onto Oxfjord itself. And as you can see on that particular day is Andrew here. I'm not sure if he's dialed in or not. And enjoying some of that super nice snow. Just a little bit soft spring snow there. So this part of the world gives some superb opportunities, I think, for ski touring. All sorts of different aspects and angles. And as I said, depending exactly on the time of year, can kind of vary your snow quality quite a lot. This was actually from one of the first trips I did up there. I'm actually skiing really late April here, but you can actually see in the background here, we've got quite a big avalanche that's come down a few days before from this sort of steep south-facing side out of shot. But then Mark here skiing down actually something that's pretty northerly, and we're still skiing really nice cold snow. And this is one of the sort of features, I think, of being in the Arctic in the springtime, is that because the sun comes in at such a low angle, relative to being in the Alps or any kind of more southerly latitude mountains, we can get superb northerly cold snow, and southerly aspect we could be skiing spring. So you can ski powder and spring on the same day. The beauty of the boat is that obviously we can just move out onto the islands with absolutely no sort of penalty in terms of time, and it's very easy to get away from other people. And I think of all the places I've skied by boat, and obviously with the exceptions of places like Antarctica and Svalbard, Finmark really works. There's lots of other places in Norway, there's roads around the edges of all the fjords, whereas in Finmark there's very few roads, and operating on the islands there's hardly any people at all. So we do have some really remote experiences, and pretty much everywhere we ski, we get to ski fresh tracks, which is pretty special, especially given how crowded many parts of the Alps nowadays. The other thing as well is I grew up as a kind of sailor with my parents on the west of Scotland, so I really love this sort of landscape. It's kind of a bit like a sort of upscaled version of the Scottish Highlands to a degree. The mountains are pretty similar size-wise, and the terrain I find very similar, but just being that much further north, we get a much later winter and a much bigger winter, so you can ski to sea really late in the season. And this is Matteo here skiing down off Nordmanfjellet, which one of my favourite ski tours. It's really superb, and we can just sort of see into Oxfjord here. So although we're on a boat and we've got the option to travel quite a long way, we don't actually sail that far. You know, probably from where we've anchored the boat here into Oxfjord, it's just a couple of hours, and superb scenery all around. And this was the end of that first particular trip down into the bay at Indre, and some idiots actually went swimming from the boat this day. I did point out before they jumped in that they were diving into the Barents Sea, and the water was about 4 degrees, but unfortunately I couldn't actually find the picture of John Naismith surf racing, because he does look like someone's just stabbed him, but maybe that's for another day. So having been in that part of the world quite a few times on a boat, I thought it'd be really great to actually do a land-based trip, because obviously being on a boat, the availability of the boat's pretty tight. I've currently got a reservation on the boat for the next 3 years, but if I didn't have that, I wouldn't get a week each year because it's so popular, and there is only currently one boat operating in that part of Norway. So I started looking around for places that might be nice to stay and kind of do some land-based skiing, and it's actually surprisingly limited. I mean, it's a bit like Lingen was 20 years ago, in that there's not many people kind of offering accommodation or places to stay. But I find this place, it's near Burfjord, and this is actually where we're going on the ski club Finmark trip this year. So if you fancy coming, in fact, we're actually staying in this cabin. So if anybody fancies joining us, I think there might still be some spaces available. And again, this part of Finmark is superb skiing and pretty quiet compared to lots of the other places. I think part of the reason for that is there's actually no guidebook to this part of Norway currently. And there's a Norwegian friend, Espen Nordal, who's written some of the guidebooks to this part of the world. He's a friend of Charles's on the boat, and Charles said if he wrote a guidebook to Finmark, he'd go around and burn his house down. So I suspect that's why he's not actually done it yet. So he's kept it fresh. So these are all some super nice shots from some spring skiing around Finmark, and all the sort of things we could do on that sort of trip next April. So as you can see, great skiing in spring snow, cold snow. And I'm just going to show you another shot of this because it's one of my favourite pictures. This is actually just taken from sitting on the beach from next to the accommodation. I think, again, Finmark, from a skiing perspective, it's got all sorts of different variety. And being on multiple aspects, we always manage to find some nice snow. This is Sophie Nicholson, who some of you may know, who writes for Fall Line, one of the has a Fall Line. And there's also some great, for those who want to ramp it up a bit, some fantastic steep skiing as well. It's taken me, I think, three visits to Finmark before we actually managed to ski this, just to get the snow just right. But on that particular day, it was superb. Also, we get plenty of bad weather. You know, we can't be under any illusion. We're in high latitude mountains, and the weather isn't always fantastic. And this was bizarrely, this was the last day of skiing for me of that particular season. It was a ski club trip up to Finmark, and it hosed it with snow. And we skied 1,500 meters of powder, as Mark Bowen, enjoying some of it. So as an end of the season, wasn't that bad a place to be. So some other parts of Norway that I think have been really good and actually pretty famous, I suppose, in terms of skiing at the moment is moving down to Lofoten. Now, the Lofoten Islands out there is sort of, they stick right out into the ocean here. So they do get some particularly, I would have said, challenging weather. The season isn't as long in Lofoten as it is further north in some of these islands up here, Senja, Kevaloya, or up into Finmark. However, it is particularly spectacular. The mountains are really quite steep. They're not as big as the mountains further north. That's at the height maximum 1,000 meters, maybe about 900 meters. However, it is incredibly beautiful and very, very, very pointy. Now, there's quite a lot of accommodation. It's quite easy to organise things in Lofoten because it's so spectacular. It's got a kind of all year round tourist industry. But the main industry there is fish. This is what it was all about. It's all about catching the cod, and the cod's very much a winter occupation because the cod are off the coast. The really big deep ocean cod come in to the coastline in the winter months, and then they catch them and they dry them and salt them, and they dry them in this open air way at this time of year because there's no insect life. It's too cold, and as soon as the insect life starts to appear, that the sort of cod season is finished, as it were. But yeah, everywhere you go, cod, the smell of cod, and it's very tasty. So Lofoten has got some really, really beautiful skiing mountains, and the problem on any ski trip, and I think a ski trip in general, but specifically a guiding trip, is you don't want to peak too early in the trip. And on this particular trip, we utterly blew it on day one. I was with Dave and Bill, and the forecast was absolutely amazing. Day one of the trip, super nice weather, and then it's going to be pretty indifferent for the next 3 or 4 days. So, well, what do? Well, you go and ski the most pointed, amazing looking thing you can find. And in the guidebook, it says this peak's called Geitgaloptinden, and it says this is the most impressive and most sought after ski touring peak in Lofoten. So we just went and did it on day one. Problem, obviously, I was pretty stressed as a guide that then what do I do for the rest of the week? But the rest of the week can come after. So really beautiful mountain, skiing as high as you can go, and then a bit of alpinism, a bit of ice axes and crampons to get up onto the summit. Just amazing views across to the mainland from Lofoten there. And the summit is what you can see. It kind of pretty much drops off on every side. You know, in terms of a ski touring peak, I can't think of many places I've been that are quite so impressive. And well, as you can see, we were up fairly early. It's always good to be early in these things, but you can see the other teams just heading up here now. But yeah, super nice, and a pretty reasonable ski down. Now, having sort of skied and wandered about the world, looking at mountains a lot, I thought it was actually one of the more impressive mountains around. It sort of reminded me a bit of sort of Seratory and Patagonia or something like that. And this was all done. We pretty much went from the door as well. Just lots of good Airbnb options in that part of the world. This is the cabin that we rented. So super nice skiing and great opportunities on all aspects. And again, some bad weather in the mountains usually means some nice snow. So you can see skiing down. So from Lofoten, I think for me, Lofoten is great, but you have to be a little bit cagey with the weather. I think speaking to people who live there, they get a lot of pretty bad weather because it sticks right out into the Atlantic. Whereas if you move across onto the mainland, across to Norway, then actually you often, the mountains are a little bit bigger, but they're a little bit more inland, so the weather's a bit colder. You can get some better quality snow often, and some really super nice skiing. So I've been to Norfolk a couple of times, and I think the Norfolk area for me is absolutely amazing. If any of you kind of are any history buffs, the Battle of Norfolk's a really famous naval battle from the Second World War. You know, we sunk 10 of their ships, they sunk 10 of our ships. There was a bit of land skirmishing, and the sort of accepted wisdom is that as a result of the Battle of Norfolk, you know, we actually managed to do Dunkirk. If we hadn't sunk so many of their warships, we might not have, German warships, we might not have managed to be so successful at Dunkirk. And it's super easy to get to Norfolk, flat to Evanes Airport. And for those who struggle to ski without the use of a ski lift, Norfolk actually has the biggest vertical of any ski area in Scandinavia. It's got 1,000 meters vertical, and it comes right out the centre of the town. So it's quite a good place to maybe mix up some lift access skiing and some ski touring. And again, it's a pretty big area, but it's quite easy to get around and kind of choose your options. And this last trip up here was quite amazing, the difference between skiing close to the coast, where it was actually relatively warm. You know, it was sort of -5, -6 in the morning. We were in March, and as soon as you moved inland away from those sort of warm coastal waters, the temperature absolutely plummeted. You know, we were kind of skipping fjords, driving inland, and it would be dropping to -20. You know, it was super cold. So really interesting. But I think that whole coast of Norway is very similar in that the sort of Gulf Stream keeps it a little bit warm, but then as soon as you move inland at all, the temperature plummets, and you can kind of play with that to get the best conditions as well. So, you know, we'd move in a little bit inland, and it's yeah, you get some quite different snow conditions. Al's just come on and said, how good is the Norwegian Avalanche information service for these remote locations? I'm super impressed, actually. It's a really good question. With the Varsum, which is the Norwegian Avalanche information service, it's a relatively new service. It was set up sort of, well, I suppose initially they started working on it about 15 years ago, but really in the current format, the last 10 years or more. And I think they do a really good job. The thing that we have to remember, if you move from somewhere like Scotland, where it's actually a really area-specific forecast, or the Alps again, which is pretty detailed, especially if you're in Switzerland or Austria, not so much in France. But the forecast areas are pretty big. They do actually put people on the ground every day. So, and I think the people they put on the ground are really, really good. So as long as you remember the forecast areas are relatively big, and things can vary quite a bit within the area, it's a really good starting point. So I think they do a great job, and they've got good app in English as well as in Norwegian, so it's pretty accessible. And these coastal mountains, you have to remember, pretty much every photograph I've got, you can see the sea, and in coastal mountains, we're dealing with a lot of wind, a lot of wind slab issues, I think, in terms of the avalanche forecast. You can see there under the guy's skis a little bit of sastrugi. And we're sort of playing with that when we're trying to decide where to ski in terms of the snow quality and stuff like that. And looking north here up towards Senja and that part of the coastline. And quite nice to see a few locals out and about. Not so much enjoying the skiing, but pretty much everywhere you go in that part of Norway, we kind of see a bit of coastal wildlife. And then one of the fantastic things about skiing in this part of the world is this is March. So March, you have quite a lot of daylight, really. But if we flip over into May, this is actually late May out in Kevaloya on the west coast, west of Tromsø. We were actually on our way to Svalbard here. We just had a couple of days in Tromsø to make sure none of our luggage went walkabout. And, you know, we're skiing, I think this is the third week in May. And it's, we had some really great skiing. And skiing from the road, and on this particular trip, I don't think we walked. We only had a couple of days skiing. But you can see the snow line is fantastic. And I've got friends who live in Tromsø and up north, and they're still skiing, you know, road to road now. So it does give you a pretty long season. It's a great way. I mean, I personally love the idea of skiing a 6-month season, starting in Teen early December and finishing in the north, sort of late May, early June. And yeah, you're skiing spring snow, but that's cool. So I wasn't going to include Iceland in the talk, and then I was chatting to someone today, and they're like, "Well, I suppose it's not technically in the Arctic, because you can see on the map here, the Arctic Circle just touches this little island in the north." So I thought I'd just include it because people are often quite interested in the skiing in Iceland, and actually, it's probably the first country that I know of that's gone down the whole COVID passport route. So if you got two vaccinations, you can actually get into Iceland, except if you're coming from the UK. So sorry about that, but I can go. So you can see a couple of areas in Norway, in Iceland, up in the Isafjord area, Northwest Fjords it's known as. And it's a super nice area for some sort of steeper couloir skiing on the mainland here. So there's actually some really nice accessible skiing, not big, you know, sort of 700 meters, maybe 600 meters, but really nice. Or quite a popular thing is to come out onto the peninsula, onto the Hornstrander, and do a kind of fjord to fjord type trip with a boat. So I did a trip out there, and it's really nice. It's really beautiful. But to be brutally honest, I was a bit underwhelmed with the terrain. I thought it was beautiful, but it's all just a bit small. It's all about, you know, to go fjord to fjord, even sort of taking in every summit you can and adding in laps and things. You're kind of struggling to make a 1,000-meter day out of it. But it's very nice, but it's I don't think it's quite as good as the other region in Iceland. We're going to have a look at in a second. However, I was boat based for this trip on a friend's yacht, and we did some super nice sailing, and we had a great afternoon on the way back into Isafjord, where we were kind of joined by a school of orcas, which was fantastic. But over onto the sort of further north, sort of an east, is the Troll Peninsula, which is probably the most famous place for ski touring in Iceland. And I would sort of probably suggest that if anyone wants to go to Iceland, certainly for the first time, this would be the place to go. This is above the village of Dalvik, and then this is the fjord. So there's lots of really nice options, and quite a few fjords, so you can duck and weave between the fjords. And interestingly, the fjords here are sort of joined by tunnels, so you quite often get different weather, so you can kind of use the webcams in the local villages on the tourist office or whatever to kind of choose where it's got the best weather on any given day. But driving isn't actually that onerous. And on this trip, we were here in March, and we did manage to get some superb northern lights. This is using this really technical photographic tool called the wheelie bin that I balanced my camera on top of because I'd forgotten to bring my tripod, but still got a few nice shots of the northern lights. We did a ski club trip up there end of May, beginning of June. Basically, I think we went home about now, and nice to see Al Reed's on the talk here, and he came on this trip, and it was really beautiful because it was hard. It didn't look like there's much snow, but don't worry, there was. But it was really beautiful because there was nobody there. Hardly saw anybody the whole time we were there. We probably carried our skis a little bit every day, maybe 20 minutes. but we got some really, really nice skiing, really super nice spring skiing. And by this point in the year, we had 24 hours daylight as well. So it didn't matter, you know, when we went out, bit of rain in the morning, oh, we'll just drink coffee. When it stops raining and the sun comes out, we'll go skiing. You know, quite often we didn't leave the house till lunchtime, and then go out and we'd come back, you know, late evening. Could come back at 11, 12 at night. Didn't really matter. Just having some really great skiing. The other thing that was really good was at this time of year, a lot of the roads had melted out. You know, we had a 4x4 we rented, and this road was pointing to here. There's no way we could have come in here in the main season. This would have been the sort of realm of people heli skiing. There is a bit of a heli ski. There's a two, three heli ski operators in Northern Iceland. There's no way you could have come in here as a ski tourer. But at this time of year, the road had melted out, so we could come right in here to here and start skiing from here. Interestingly, you'd sort of think there's quite a bit of conflict between ski tourers and heli skiers, and actually they manage it really responsibly in Iceland. In fact, actually, I think most places the people are kind of ski touring and heli skiing is that if the ski tourers operating, they just go somewhere different, and usually they go to a peninsula called the Gold Coast, where there isn't actually a road, so people wouldn't be ski touring. So Iceland sort of fits as well quite nicely, because if you're going to head across the Greenland, certainly along the east coast, everywhere is accessible from Iceland, obviously COVID accepted. And I've been lucky enough to make 4 trips to Greenland now. It's a little bit furry, this, but and Greenland is obviously, most of it's above the Arctic Circle. First couple of trips I made, it was in the Gudbrandsfjord area, which is the highest, interestingly, the highest peak in the Arctic Circle. Most people think it's Denali in Alaska, but it's actually quite a bit south of the Arctic Circle. So the highest point is Gudbrandsfjord, which actually for a super remote mountain is actually surprisingly popular. And by popular, I mean it probably gets 2 or 3 ascents a year. I've been there twice, and we were the only people both times. And the other place I've been is down a place called Kulasuk down here, where a friend of mine, Matt Spencer, lives, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a little while. It's sort of just south of the Arctic Circle, but it feels like the Arctic, so we're going to include it today. So Gudbrandsfjord in the Watkins Mountains, it's pretty remote, and the way to access it is by ski plane. You could ski in from the coast. It is done. It has been done, not very often, because it would take you a week to 10 days. And the glaciers are pretty gnarly that you've got to drag your sledges up to get to. So there's actually just flying in from Iceland in a ski plane. It makes it pretty simple. Twin Otter, which is, yeah, if any of you have seen any shots of operating in Antarctica or any other remote mountains, the Twin Otter is basically a Land Rover with wings and skis, so it can dump you pretty much anywhere that's got flat snow, and with actually a surprisingly large amount of kit on board. So yeah, we flew in. We actually refueled at Constable Point on the coast, and then flew in and got dumped. Now, having operated with Twin Otters a lot in the Antarctic, I'd kind of wired into the fact that actually, if you talk nicely to the pilot, he'll probably do a flyby of just about everything you want to ski over the next couple of weeks, because the speed and the fuel cost of doing that in an aircraft is pretty minimal. So actually, that's exactly what I asked him to do. I said, can we just have a bit of a fly round over some of the mountains that we might go and ski on, and kind of help eyeball some objectives as to what would be nice to do. Also, from the air, it's much easier to spot crevasse fields. You can see quite a big crevasse field where 2 really big glaciers join, and you kind of get an impression of terrain that you might want to avoid, or things that actually look really good and might be really good fun to ski on. And this is what I did. You can obviously see that there weren't many ski tracks around. I think we were the first people there. I think we were the only people there this year on that particular occasion. And the mountains are very, you can see the horizontal banding in the mountains there, kind of volcanic mountains. So the way these trips work is that you get dumped somewhere, they throw all your stuff out. Usually it's an incredibly massive pile of clutch. you check the radio works, you check the satellite photo works. It's always that would be a bit disastrous otherwise. Then the aircraft takes off, heads off as an obligatory flyby. I'm completely convinced that there's a kind of twin otter pilot regulation which says we must skim the top of somebody's tent when we leave them, and then they just vanish. And this particular trip, that was us for 3 weeks, which is amazing because it goes from quite an intense experience operating with aircraft. You know, can we land? Is the weather good enough to go? Is it not? Can we get everything we want on the plane? You're weighing all your stuff, making sure the load works all right, because obviously the aircraft can't be overloaded. Sometimes we'll take off with so much fuel, plus all the kit on board, that we can't actually land because we'll break the undercarriage. So we have to make sure we burn enough fuel when we land, so we can land properly, and then the guys can get back to where they want to go. So it all feels quite intense. Then all of a sudden the aircraft goes, and it's just like silence, and it really is quite amazing. We actually shared logistics on the aircraft with bizarrely a very old friend of my wife's, some guys who were planning to try and ski to the South Pole, a guy called Ben Saunders. They were trying to recreate Scott's route across the Ross Sea. So it's across the Ross ice shelf and up to the South Pole and back. So they were actually training, and it turns out Ben was brought up at the end of Kate's Road, and she used to babysit them. So anyway, they did some training. They didn't go the next year, but they did eventually manage to go, and they completed that journey. Though ironically, they had to have a fuel and food drop just about where Scott perished. So some interesting lessons in British polar exploration. So in Greenland, we've suddenly upped the ante in terms of seriousness, and not from a mountaineering perspective, from a kind of a big white hairy thing with teeth. Operating in this part of the world, you always have to have a firearm. Anywhere, you know, Greenland, Svalbard, we need to carry a firearm just in case of polar bears. In this particular occasion, we actually had a pump action shotgun with solid slugs. If polar bear's pretty big if it's coming at you, so you have to make sure you make a pretty big hole in it back. And we have to start any trip by making sure everybody knows how to load, aim, and fire the weapon. Obviously, shooting at a bear is pretty serious stuff in terms of nobody wants to shoot something such an amazing creature. But at the same time, we just need to know that we have the facility and the ability. And there's sort of tiers of how you operate with bears, you know, in terms of making lots of noise, trying to scare them away. If that doesn't work, using flares to try and scare them away, and very much shooting them as an absolute kind of last resort. So as you guessed, we're camping for the next sort of 3 weeks, quite different to living in lodges and boats in Norway. And camping is pretty civilized, I think. This is Kate, my wife, and melting water is a massive kind of part of operating in any of these Arctic environments. It takes a long time. You can see the pans in the background, making sure we've got enough water to stay hydrated. It can also be quite cold in this part of the world. When we arrived on this particular trip, it was -24 the first night, which was a bit chilly and a bit colder than I'd kind of expected in May in Greenland. But fortunately, it sort of warmed up pretty quickly, and it was pretty nice. So our plan was to sort of ski at some peaks around this sort of glacier, climb a few mountains, and then sort of drag all our kit down one glacier, up another glacier, and then climb Gunbjornsfjell, the highest peak in the area. Now, the previous trip I'd done here, I'd actually made 22 first ascents of mountains or different routes. We'd had 3 weeks of weather that was like this. We weren't quite so lucky on this trip. We still had some plenty of good weather, but we only climbed like 2 or 3 new peaks. And it's kind of funny, this idea of climbing new mountains. It seems quite impressive, but when you look around you in this part of the world, it sort of seems a little bit arbitrary. In that, you know, there's just amazing new mountains to be climbed in pretty much every direction, and amazing, you know, things to ski in every direction as well. So I think for me, going to these places, the kind of idea of first ascent seems a bit odd. It's all about just having a great time and enjoying yourself. And with a backdrop like that, it's pretty much impossible, I think, to sort of not enjoy yourself. You can see on the previous trip I'd done, everything had been a little bit snowier. This, you can see it's on the background there on the peak around Cape there. It's a little bit icy. There was a lot more ice around, so some of the peaks are much more technical to get onto. But a lot of the lower angled skiing still give us some great options. And one of the super nice things about this part of the world, I think, is the light. You know, the light is still very low angled, so it's a kind of photographer's dream, really. And it's only really at the sort of height of the day, the sort of brightest point of the day, that it feels really, really bright. So we said we're going to sort of move with a big move in the middle of the trip. And as you can see, Kate's sledge there is pretty well laden. And I obviously didn't have the opportunity to weigh them, but I reckon they were sort of between 60 and 100 kilos. We sort of spread the kit out between the team, depending on their sort of speed and strength, just to make sure we could all move at a similar sort of pace. And we sort of cruised along. I'm actually at the front there. And if we got into any places that we were worried about crevasses, we just put a rope on. So we were all kind of roped up as well. But actually, dragging sledges like that is actually surprisingly easy compared to carrying rucksacks. You can get pretty heavy loads and sort of tow them about. It's actually not too bad. But I would sort of thoroughly recommend it as a weight loss program as well. I think on one trip, dragging sledges around, I think I lost about a stone in 2.5 weeks. So maybe we should be selling it as weight loss training. And as you can see, that the weather had sort of warmed up at some point at this point when we'd moved round to the base of Gunbjornsfjeld. And it's sort of interesting, within the team of people we had, as I said, half the team were really just wanted a nice time in Greenland, and if we climbed Gunbjornsfjeld, that would be a kind of a nice thing. Whereas some of the other team were utterly focused on this, climbing the highest peak in the Arctic Circle, and within that it's often thought of as the 8th summit, because it's the 7 continental highest peaks. And one of the guys with us was actually from Hong Kong, and he climbed the 7 summits, and he basically didn't want to do anything but climb the highest peak, which personally I find a bit weird, but everybody has their own motivation. So I have encamped at the bottom of Gunbjornsfjeld. It started to snow, and you can see at the back of the photograph here, we got a tripwire. It looks like a tripwire because it's a tripwire, and we've got quite an loud alarm. It means you can actually go to bed at night, and if a bear wandered into your camp, hopefully it'll kind of trip the tripwire, and I doubt if it'll scare the bear. It might do. And this one I don't think it would. It was just kind of actually a kind of a rape type alarm, but it would wake you up and at least make you aware, and then you could do something about it. It definitely takes a few nights of sort of having that in your consciousness to remember that actually you're sleeping with a loaded firearm next to your sleeping bag as well. It did have the safety on, it wasn't cocked, however it's still a loaded gun, so it does take a bit of getting used to. And then it snowed, and we drank tea, and then it snowed, and it snowed, and it snowed. And I think it snowed pretty much every day for 3 days. And you can see here on the left here, one of the team digging his tent out. And it's like you have to sort of encourage them, everybody, to get up every couple of hours and go around and dig their tents out, because otherwise, well, the tent could collapse, but also you could get suffocated or get carbon monoxide poisoning. The last thing you want to be doing is cooking in a tent when it's all kind of buried in snow. So eventually it stopped snowing, and you can see how much snow we've kind of built up around the tents. And the light came good, and the skiing came good, and we had couple of really nice days skiing while the weather settled and the snow settled before we tried to go and climb Gunbjornsfjeld. And the reason we wanted the snow to settle a bit is because it's just a really big day. It's about 1,800 meters, 1,900 meters of climbing. The summit's at 3,700, so a little bit of altitude. And we got just a superb day to go onto the summit. And to see the whole of Greenland, the east coast of Greenland spread out behind you, it was just magical. And you can see why this concept of first ascent seems pretty ridiculous when there's so many peaks behind you and in every direction. And it was relatively cold on the top. but not so much that we couldn't sort of basically just chill out and enjoy where we were, and enjoy the I suppose the pinnacle, the highlight of the trip to a degree, is the obligatory selfie. Now it got pretty warm by this point in the trip, like, I mean, really warm. So sort of snow walls melting in tents and all that sort of thing. And I was actually quite concerned about the aircraft coming in. I'd actually been on an aircraft in Antarctica, which we couldn't get airborne because it was so totally overloaded. And it took us 5 attempts of hammering out a runway, and ended up with all the passengers in the back of the aircraft jumping up and down to try and get the front ski out to get the thing airborne. So when the pilot came in and landed, the snow was really sticky, and he came sort of sliding in, and I was quite concerned. And he's like, "Oh no, I'll be fine." And fun enough, it was fine. But we did take an awfully long way before we got airborne. I reckon we were sort of full throttle for about 1.5 km, whereas normally be off in about 500 or 600 meters. So anyway, so that was my last trip to sort of, I suppose, super remote Greenland. But the next trip, I've been done a couple of trips down to Kulisuk, which if you fancy somewhere like Greenland, I would say it's sort of, I'm not going to describe it as Greenland-like, because it's not. It's still, you know, all the glaciated aspects of, you know, big mountains, polar bears, glaciers, and all the sea ice and all that sort of thing. However, it's a significantly cheaper place to operate. You can fly there in about 2.5 hours from Reykjavik in a sort of it's a commercial flight, normally with Air Iceland, 3 times a week, I think. And you get dumped at the airport at Kulisuk. On this particular trip, I was swapping, as a friend, another guide was going home. So we did the ceremonial swapping of the rifle just outside the airport, because you're not allowed to take any firearms into the airport. And then we sorted our kit out, and we actually skinned across to the village, which is sort of half an hour, 40 minutes away from the airport. And the village of Kulisuk, it's a very traditional hunting community. It really does feel like it's still a proper old school Greenlandic subsistence economy. Really nice people, really friendly. And a good friend of mine, Matt Spencer, I got to know because I trained him as a guide, and he's become a really good friend. Matt first visited Kulisuk probably almost 20 years ago, and he set up a business there guiding in that part of the world. And he's bought a house there that he's extended and renovated and turned into a ski lodge that other guys, his own clients, come and stay in, or other guides come and stay in. And he organises all your logistics. And his whole business is completely sort of embedded in the local community. The people are helping provide your logistics are all local people, and people taking you skiing. And you can see why he's decided to live there. That's heading out across the sea ice to all those great skiing opportunities. This is a local football team just practicing of an evening. And this part of the world is just magnificent. There's a much bigger village on the other side of the fjord here in Tasselak, but they don't have an airport. There's about 1,000 people live there, and that's actually linked to Kulisuk by helicopter, so not particularly convenient, but a really stunning part of the world. So Matt, bought this place, renovated it, and he described it as like an alpine hut. He's very modest, it's significantly more comfortable, and it's got we had up to 18 people staying there at various points. Now, this part of the world, as you can see, we're on an island down here. Kulisuk is down on the bottom here, the island of Kulisuk, where the airport is. But we've got some skiing on Kulisuk, and loads of great skiing out on Apusiak Island and on these other islands. And although you can see they're linked by water, the time of year we're there, it's actually all linked by sea ice, so we can just drive around on it. And you can see it's sort of FATMAP imagery. There's just so many great skiing opportunities. So what we do in not every day, but quite a few days, we just get dragged out by skidoo and then dropped at the bottom of our mountain. And then we're off into that sort of classic ski touring mode, skinning up as high as we can go till it gets too steep for skins, climbing up onto the summit. It's a little bit breezy here on this particular day, and then onto the summit. And you can see the view is superb all the way down the east coast. And again, we're on coastal mountains in the Arctic, so we're considering polar bears. Rich here's carrying the rifle very kindly on this particular day. And just some superb mountains. Eric the Red's peak out there. Apparently, this is I think everybody claims on the east coast of Greenland this is where Eric the Red discovered at Greenland, but then the locals reckon it was here. But they look like super nice mountains anyway. And fairly cold. We were here in April time, and we had relatively cold weather, which was great because it kept the snow conditions super nice. Again, fitting with those high latitude skiing, things that are southerly aspect, we skied some nice springs. See Fiona skiing some quite nice springs here. And then northerly aspect, quite often we would ski cold snow. The guys had actually built a hut on the other side of Pusjak Island. And this was great to kind of go out and have I would describe as a really kind of remote type experience, but without actually carrying a tent or anything yourself. So we got dragged out and dumped at the ice edge there, and then skinned up and over some really nice peak. And you can see for the snow quality there, we've got really nice kind of powdery snow, though it's actually relatively warm in the sunshine. We climbed up and over a mountain, and then skied down the other side onto the sea ice, along the sea ice to this is the hut that the guys have built, and it's kind of heavy duty fabric really, and it's got a heater inside. It's got sleeping bags, so you just need to bring a sheet sleeping bag. Food's all pre-placed, stoves and everything there, and then the bear alarm is spread all around it. Rich is just setting up the bear alarm here. You actually screw in one of these kind of it's a cartridge from a flare pistol, like a very pistol. So if the bear breaks the line or just walks into the line, which is a really thin wire, there's like two really loud bangs and a flare. So you kind of hope, like the other one, I think this one will be more effective. It scares the bear, but it also makes sure you're really aware of it. But the amusing part of that is that what we do is we leave it kind of unarmed during the day. Then last thing at night, you sort of tell everybody, right, okay, we're about to set the alarm. If you need a pee, make sure you just go outside, come out round the back of the hut, stay close to the hut so you don't go anywhere near the alarm. Otherwise, you're either going to get a big scare or you're going to get shot, because I'm sleeping next to a loaded gun. And of course, inevitable happened. I'm sleeping in the front of the hut next to the door, and someone goes out for the toilet. I'm fast asleep. Bang, bang. Grab the gun, and of course, luckily, all I'm seeing is someone who's really scared standing outside. It's looking rather embarrassed rather than being eaten by a bear. And you can see the inside of the hut's pretty comfortable, kind of nice heater there, and it's actually pretty warm and comfortable, and really beautiful views outside onto the sea ice. Never really got properly dark. This is sort of mid to late April, but sort of dusky, so really nice light. And then we do a couple of days skiing from there, and then crossed another kind of really nice col, nice mountain, and Great Norths, beautiful peaks, and then skiing down back towards Kulisuk, and then got picked up and taken back to the house. Now, everyone always complains because I always show pictures of blue sky and powder. So we did actually have some bad weather on this trip. But if it's bad weather, that means it's snowing. So you just have to make sure you go out and enjoy the snow. Now, one of the big features in the Arctic, I think, especially Greenlandic Arctic, East Greenland, is the dogs. Now, Kulisuk, I think there's about 300 dogs live in Kulisuk, 300 or 400, maybe even more. There must be more. I think there's more dogs than people. And they're really beautiful dogs, big huskies. And they use them mainly for hunting. They're mainly out on snowmobiles nowadays. But there's a really big sort of local dog racing scene, as in like with sledges, people racing them a lot, and people go out hunting with them as well. And they'll use the dogs to scare off polar bears, but they'll also use the dogs to hunt polar bears as well. On the east coast of Greenland, you can hunt polar bears. They can hunt up to the east coast villages. There's 4 villages. They can take up to 25 bears a year. It's just a sort of interesting sort of environmental discussion. they argue that they only take the kind of older, weaker males. And I'm sure there's arguments either ways, but that's their way of life. And I think if you're going to go and spend any time in these places, you've got to respect their way of life. Well, this is the highlight of this trip for me, I think, was we actually went skiing. We got towed out. Any of you have done any dog sledding in the Canadian Arctic, you'll be used to those sort of running the dogs in parallel. Whereas because they're in trees a lot of the time, whereas up in Greenland, they run them in a fan. And the fan spreads the weight out if they're on sea ice. And also it's much easier to set up. And the dogs sort of run side by side, and they're incredibly competitive with each other. They're also really good at fighting. So you'll be trying to overtake another dog team, and the whole thing will stop for a massive scrap. And then the driver will get off, and there'll be dogs thrown around and hit with sticks. And then the next thing you know, you're off again. So we got dragged out to the base of this peak, and it had snowed the day before. So we thought this would be good days. This was our last day of the trip. And you get dumped off by dog sled. And it's amazing. You don't have 4 burly skiers and all the kit on it. You just got one driver, how fast these things can go. And off they'd go and leave us. And we had a really superb end to the trip. Really, really, really great skiing. And we go back to Matt's house, and you can actually see where we'd skied. I'm just going to point this. Yeah, you can see our tracks. We came all the way down here. Absolutely fantastic into this bowl. And so we went back up and did it again. Really nice end to the trip. Now, interestingly, the last time I was up in this part of the world, we had very different weather. And you can see the soggy sea ice. This was very similar to the year. It was April, but this was the first time they'd had continuous or lots of rain in April in anyone's living memory. And the whole place had a slightly different feel. We still had a really nice trip. We still had a really interesting trip, but we had absolutely terrible weather. Absolutely terrible. We were having to use boats much more to move around, which is pretty simple, really. If there's no sea ice, you can just put a boat in the water. And the guys there use these really lightweight boats with big outboards because they can drag them really easily onto the sea ice. But it didn't have the same sort of atmosphere as when we were driving around on the sea ice. Getting on and off the sea ice obviously provided an element of challenge as well. This is going around to the hut again at the same time, but this time you're sort of wiggling from a lump of sort of floating ice to floating ice. Still some great skiing. Interestingly, I spoke to Matt the other day. He's just gone back to Kulisuk. He's been down in Europe and in the UK for a month visiting family. And he said they've got the best sea ice he can ever remember currently. And he said they've got absolutely remarkable sea ice this year. Kind of ironic that none of his clients can get to him to enjoy it. But there we go. So the last place I'm going to talk about, and I'm aware of the time, hopefully you don't have to all be anywhere, is Svalbard. Svalbard, as I said, is kind of the most, I think, some of the most northerly skiable mountains in the world. I've made 3 trips now, and to me, it feels a bit like the Antarctic Peninsula, but it's 3.5 hours flight from Oslo to Longyearbyen. So it's sort of, you can have that really high latitude experience. You know, this is 80 north is the north end of the kind of mountains here, and 80 south is the Vinson Massif, you know, which is the highest mountain in Antarctica. So, you know, which would cost you $35,000, I think it is, to visit the Vinson Massif, whereas you can just get a commercial flight. There's 2 a day, I think, or there certainly was before COVID, into Longyearbyen. And then for me, the trips I've done up there have all been by boat again. I think for me, boat works really well because you don't have to worry about camping. You don't have to worry about polar bears, because although polar bears are sort of a marine mammal, I have heard of them getting onto yachts with counter sterns, but if your yacht's the right yacht, then they're not going to get on it either. And then from Longyearbyen, it's just fantastic ski opportunities everywhere into the inside of Eastfjorden. Going to talk about Pyramiden in a little bit, but up north into Johnsfjord, Prinsgarsforland, lots of places. And then Ny-Ålesund, I haven't been as far north as Ny-Ålesund. I was meant to be there right now skiing, but that's the most northerly inhabited place in the world, and there's a couple of research centres up there. So this was the boat. I operated on a bigger ship the first time I went, and the second time I went on an aluminium yacht, which was really nice. And then this time started working with a Norwegian skipper who really enjoys this part of the world. He's from the island of Senja, and on the Dune 3 is his boat, which has been, yeah, I think it's a really great boat to work with up there. Little minor sailing things like having a covered cockpit, so a wheelhouse, so you can actually sail the boat without being outside in the cold is actually really, really nice. And using, you know, all the same sort of ski and sail techniques that we'd used in mainland Norway or other parts of the world, anchoring the boat, going ashore, and going skiing. But obviously you can see the sort of layers of complexity that we're adding in. We're adding in ski touring, which is a bit complicated. We're adding in ski touring on a glacier, which is a bit complicated. We're adding in a boat, and then we're obviously adding in polar bears. And there's far more polar bears in Svalbard than pretty much any other place. Well, not any other place, but any other place you like to go skiing, I think. Certainly, I'm you know, having spent quite a lot of time in Greenland, I've seen prints, but never seen a bear. I've seen a dead bear, actually, someone shot, but I haven't seen any moving bears, whereas in Svalbard, I've been there 3 times and seen bears twice. So, yeah, so we're very much aware of it. And I'll talk more about bears in a minute. Being on a yacht is super relaxed as well. Quite a nice big boat, plenty of space, and pretty comfortable. Interesting, Nils on the right with the big beardy guy. He actually lives in Svalbard all year round, and he lives in a cabin outside of Longyearbyen. I said, "But you're not worried, you know, about bears?" He said, "No, because I sleep with a Magnum 44 next to my bed." So the other thing about a big comfortable boat is Oyvind, the skipper, is a little bit eccentric and decided he would put a hot tub on the back deck of his boat, which is quite amusing. Obviously, he empties it when we sailed, and then we'd go sailing, and we'd collect some driftwood, and he'd fire up it's a wood-fired hot tub, and then you'd have a hot tub in the nice salt water, and then after skiing, which was pretty luxurious. This is what I meant about the sort of an ambience a bit like the Antarctic Peninsula. Here you've got really big glaciers sort of dropping right into the sea. Obviously you have big glaciers like this on the east coast of Greenland, but there's sort of so much sea ice on the east coast of Greenland, it would be really, really difficult to do a sort of ski and sail type trip, or you'd have to be so late in the year that this, or you'd be so limited as to where you could go. I don't think it would be any advantage to doing that. Whereas in Svalbard, it really works because of the way the currents. You don't get that much in the way of sea ice coming up here in May. I think May is probably the best month to go, and it's truly spectacular. Obviously, you've got to carry a rifle everywhere. Because of the rifle ownership, it's actually mandatory to have a firearm if you leave the village of Longyearbyen. It's probably the only place in the world. And this rifle is specifically made for Svalbard because it's got a short barrel. So it's actually really easy to carry if you're on a skidoo or if you're skiing. And it has to be handy as well. But really, again, really, really beautiful mountains. Now this place is my father actually did quite a lot of research. He was a geography teacher. He did quite a lot of research into an expedition called the Scottish Antarctic Expedition. He wrote a book about it. And the guy who organised that was a guy called William Spears Bruce. So this bay is called Bruce's Bay. So I was obviously quite enthusiastic that we visit this. And the guys on the boat were like, it's a terrible anchorage. But however, it's right next to a fantastic walrus colony. And I think one of the incredible parts about things about visiting this part of, or any of these high latitude places is the wildlife. And these guys just lie on the beach. And they weigh 300 kilos. They're really not that bothered about you. They might sort of raise their head and have a little sort of a look and a sniffle, but they're really not that bothered about you. And you can get pretty close. There used to be about apparently 300-400 walrus in this colony, but unfortunately hunters shot most of them going back in the day. So there's sort of 30 or 40 of them there regularly now. And because it's so cold and the weather's so extreme there, the sort of life cycle is really slowed down. So to actually increase the numbers is incredibly slow. But they're truly pretty magnificent. It's really funny because they're so ungainly and so kind of, I hate to say ugly, but yeah, ungainly when they're moving around on land. But when you see them in the sea, they're just amazing. They're just so graceful, and they can, yeah, you definitely want to stay clear of them when you're on the boat. And to have that backdrop is magnificent. On the boat, again, we can move around really easily, and we had a really nice, some really nice skiing around. This is a glacier called Dalbreen, and I think actually one of my best days ski touring, actually, just because of the place. You know, the morning we spent sort of drifting around the front of this calving glacier, you know, drinking coffee, climbing the mast into the crow's nest to really sort of appreciate where you were, and then dropped off on the beach, and then a really nice, got dropped off, you can see the bay here where we got dropped off. Really nice, beautiful ski tour up on this glacier called Oliversbreen. And again, nice ski touring, not steep. You kind of cut off here. But just the views are just absolutely remarkable. I think some of the best views of anywhere I've ski toured. And just pretty magical. Pretty magical. Martin was having a kind of a private moment as well out there. He'd just he'd just gone a year. He just had the news that he was a year clear without any cancer, having followed cancer treatment. So it was a good place to have a private moment, I thought. And again, you can see fairly north aspect. So we just had some really good snow and good skiing on the way down. Hoping that Ivan had lit the hot tub. When we move around to Johnsfjord, and the great thing here is there are maps to this area, but they're like 1 to 100,000 scale, so they're nothing but a sort of a vague outline of what the terrain might give you. In fact, I've been using FATMAP a bit before we went to kind of get some ideas of slope angles and what we might do. But to be honest, the best thing to do is you just sail around and go, oh, that looks really nice. Why don't we go up there? And it has to be said, that proved to work pretty accurately. You know, we had enough equipment that we could get the rope out if we wanted to, and some of the sort of just little bits of mountaineering was just superb again, and great descents in every direction. And of course, we had to have a drop of the Shackleton with us. If any of you have tried this, it was apparently a recreation of Ernest Shackleton's whiskey to the South Pole, or well, it didn't go to the South Pole, but took to the South, and yeah. I wouldn't recommend it. It's all right, but not special. So on that particular trip, actually one of the folk on the boat fell over and hurt her shoulder. So we actually had to come back. We'd been skiing up around here, and we went back to Longyearbyen to drop her off at the hospital and get her shoulder sorted out. So we still had a few more days left. So we actually went right into the inside of Eastfjord and in towards this village of Pyramiden, which is an abandoned Russian mining town. And there's loads of really interesting sort of relics all over Svalbard. These huts were left by the Scottish Svalbard Syndicate, who'd started a mining concern there way back in the 1800s. And the huts are still there, but obviously they never made any money out of it. And there's these sort of abandoned bits of sort of exploratory, you know, hunting, mining, all over the place. Now we'd kind of heading in towards Pyramiden, we've been talking to various other boats, and they said they'd been a polar bear sighted sort of somewhere in that area. So we were kind of right a lot. The bears hunt on the ice edge, so we've been looking really carefully. You know, guys in the crow's nest, look everyone out with binoculars just to see if we could see a polar bear. And then someone saw this bear moving along the sea ice. It's not a giant seagull and it's not a small bear. It's just perspective. This thing is massive. It's about probably a couple 100 kilos, particularly big. And we got to spend an hour, maybe a little bit more, just cruising along beside it. It was just fantastic. It was completely uninterested in us. They definitely know they're kind of top dog and have no predators at all other than people. And in Svalbard, nobody's allowed to hunt bears. The only ones that ever get shot are in sort of defence, as it were. And if you shoot a polar bear, it's basically treated like a murder investigation. That's an incredibly serious thing. So we're sort of sitting, watching our bear, enjoying ourselves, and then a pod of beluga whales swam past. It was kind of the full David Attenborough. It was about 20 belugas swam past, and then a walrus swam past as well. But unfortunately, didn't get that on camera. But yeah, it was pretty special sort of wildlife experience. Then we sort of sailed off to Pyramiden, and Pyramiden was this sort of was a full Russian mining colony, and they did export coal from there, and then it was never economic, and it became even less economic. There still is a sort of semi-economic mining at a village called Barentsburg, but which has got quite easy port access. Whereas here at the top of East Fjord, the harbour would be frozen for 6 months of the year. So they just decided to abandon it. They literally just walked out. And I think actually as a place, it works really well in black and white photography because they literally just walk out. And everything is just abandoned as it was. It's pretty remarkable. You can go and wander about. And then there was nobody there for almost 10 years. It was like 8 years or something, 9 years. And then they suddenly realised that if there was nobody there, the ownership of the land would revert to the Norwegian government. Or sorry, all the stuff would revert to the Norwegian government. So they've renovated one of the buildings, and you can actually stay there as a hotel, which I think would be a bit weird. And there's a couple of people there all the time. When we were there, they were pretty addled with vodka, which I think actually seems pretty reasonable if you were stuck there all the time. But it's a pretty amazing place to sort of wander around. And we've been sort of wandering around, and the boat was anchored just off the sea ice. We had to cross about 1 kilometre of sea ice to get in. And we were sitting on this little knoll, sort of looking out to sea. And I was pretty sure I could see a bear next to the boat. The boat was at anchor, and the guys were actually making bread down below. So I got on the radio and I said, Ivan, I think there's a bear. I don't have any pictures of it, fortunately. A bear next to the boat. And he's like, I think he thought that we were like on the sea ice and the bear was right next to us. So he ran up on deck and he's like, yeah. Where are you? I said, like, don't worry, we're like 1.5 kilometres away, and I can see it with the binoculars. And we ended up waiting for like 1.5 hours while this bear just sort of pottered about, and then eventually it wandered off along the ice edge looking for seals. And once it was completely out of sight, we sort of, ran. You can't really run on sea ice; it's too slippy. But slithered across the sea ice as fast as we can, and back onto the boat. So it's a good kind of very sobering sort of experience. Now, our last day in Svalbard, and it's sort of, I suppose, the last day and I talk about this evening. Everyone says, you go to these high latitudes, and it's all about the place. It's all about the people. It's all about the landscape. The skiing will be rubbish, and I would completely refute that, because this was our last day in Svalbard, where we had it snowed overnight, and we were sitting on the boat, and I kind of keep looking out, and it was snowing and snowing and snowing, and then as soon as it stopped, it's like, folks, it stopped snowing. There's a few blue flakes. And then as soon as we started getting some patches of blue, we went ashore and started skinning, and we just had the most magical kind of last day of the trip. Really great skiing. Summit to ski powder, which is you do get it, but it's not as common as you'd hope. And it really was a magical trip. We only did, I think, 3 laps. And then the sun came out and the snow began to change a little bit, and we changed aspects, and the sort of last run of the trip really gave us some spectacular terrain as the snow just began to transform, and then down onto the beach and back to the boat. And that was the end of that trip. We headed back to Longyearbyen, and it seems like a really sort of a nice way to round off this evening's talk. Sorry I've gone dramatically over time, but hopefully you've enjoyed some of the imagery. And I would definitely encourage you to kind of enjoy some element of Arctic skiing at some point in your career, and it'd be nice if you want to join me sometime. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and if anyone's got any questions, please ask, either FATMAP related or ski related. Anyone there? Deathly silence.
You've answered all the questions, Bruce.
Yeah, sorry I went a bit over there, folks, but as I said, I was struggling to chip the imagery down. So I thought, well, if folk get bored, they can leave.
No, I some great comments coming through. I think you know, it would have been inspiring and amazing, whatever. But when some of us haven't seen snow for 20 months, it's almost cruel. But it looked incredible, absolutely incredible. So thank you so much for that, Bruce. And we will be returning with some more seminars and webinars and virtual talks soon. They're all on the event page on the Ski Club website. We will be adding more to that as they become confirmed. Yeah, I think just some great comments in there. Amazing presentation. Thank you so much, Bruce. Thank you so much to FATMAP and the team, and for partnering with us on this. And do make sure that you take advantage of that FATMAP offer. Clearly, Bruce has made good use of it in some pretty remote parts of the world. So it's an amazing tool. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you back here again for our next talk very soon.